السبت at روحانية.
They kind of kept to themselves about faith, but had connections across the entire diaspora, which they could do trade, and as a result, they were well regarded here as merchants. After the growth of the church, after Constantine, now that's the big shift. You know, for Christians, it became much better. They became a licit religion. They were tolerated. Judaism, which had been a licit religion, a tolerated legal religion, prior to Constantine, no longer were. As a result, really, as Christianity becomes the religion of the state, since Jews don't adopt the state religion, they become enemies of the state. And particularly, Christians continue to blame Jewish people perpetually for killing Christ, Christ killer accusation. And since there was clarity by the 4th century about the deity of Christ, they were not just accused of killing Jesus, they were accused of murdering God, deicide, and to suffer perpetually. And so the two leading church fathers, Augustine in the West and John Chrysostom in the East, basically accused Jews of being perpetually guilty and perpetually to be oppressed. So Augustine developed the idea of the Jewish people have a mark of Cain, they're to wander the earth and to be oppressed, but not to be destroyed, just like Cain was to wander and God gave him the mark. Chrysostom was worse. He called all synagogues houses of prostitution. He said, God always hated the Jews. It's incumbent upon all Christians to hate the Jews. Those are quotes from his sermons on the Jewish people. So it became very difficult. By the time you get to the 13th century, Jewish people are a perpetually oppressed class, but they were able to survive because they had a number of unique areas of survival. One was the church in the Middle Ages considered being a physician like a magician. And so they didn't allow Christians to become physicians. Also, they would have to go study to be physicians in the East, in the Islamic world. Christians were no longer welcome there. So Jewish people could go to the East and study to be physicians and then come back here and provide medical aid, like cataract surgery and things like that in the Western world. That was one thing. They also had continued up until the Crusades to have a good deal of merchant work, but after the Crusades that stopped. Nevertheless, Jewish people continued here. One of the areas that the church enacted was that Christians could not lend money at interest to other Christians, based on the law of Moses, where it says Israel could not lend money at interest to other Israelites. So the church enacted this law, but you could borrow money from Jews. And so that's how the whole idea of the Jewish connection to money and money lenders came about, because the church forced Jewish people into that business. And then, of course, they were basically glorified pawnbrokers. And if you take your family diamond and you pawn it and then you lose it, you don't think, I should have known better. What do you think? That rapacious Jew who stole my money. Or the church then and other governments in Europe then began to exact greater and greater taxes from Jewish moneylenders. So what did they have to do? Increase interest, hence usury, right? So it made for a difficult situation. In 1263, 1215, the Lateran Council, Fourth Lateran Council, established all sorts of distinctive laws for Jews. Jews had to wear a distinctive hat. Jews had to not have any Christian servants. Jews were constantly being limited in what they could do in even greater fashion according to church council law, the Lateran Council. What happens in Venice, Italy, in 1517 is they came up with this great idea to make all the Jews live behind walls in the least desirable area, in the foundry district, where the iron was smelted. That happens in Venice. Now, foundry in Italian is the word ghetto. All through Europe, Jewish people were put behind ghetto walls. In Rome, it was established in 1555. Can't leave at night, must be behind the gates, must be behind the walls. Terrible situation led to Jewish diseases because people couldn't marry outside of their immediate area. Today there's distinctive Jewish genetic disorders because of that among Jews of Europe. This happened, Jews had to wear yellow scarves or sometimes a star or a menorah or two tablets to identify them as Jews wherever they went. It became a really difficult way of living here in this area, which is the ghetto. Why did they pick this area for the ghetto? Because it was the swampy area. It was where the water came up from the river. And so as a result, it was the least desirable. It was a flood zone. So that's where Jews lived, and they couldn't expand, so building upon building upon building, very dangerous. Someone said Napoleon was an ill wind that blew some good. As he conquered Europe, he removed the ghetto walls. And that's when the ghetto fell. However, Jewish people continued to stay here. The ghetto remained closed until the Nazis reestablished it throughout Europe. They wanted to eliminate every Jew that lived here. Probably about 15,000 Jewish people lived in Rome. The Italian gave lip service to agreeing with the Nazis about that, but didn't really acquiesce. And it was only after the fall of Mussolini when they began to gather up Jews. Truth to tell, Pope Pius XII was not a friend of the Jews, but was very Germanophile, loved the Germans, but still they didn't want to gather up, the Italian people didn't want to gather up their Jews and send them out. So of the 15,000 or so Jewish people here, only about 1,800 were sent to Auschwitz when the Nazis gathered them. Why? Because many Italians hid their Jewish neighbors. So that's an amazing situation to have encountered that here. Not many Europeans were like that, but they were like that here in this area where we're at right now. So that is the story of the Jewish quarter. This is just the synagogues over there on the other side. You can see that. There's a museum in there. I'm not going to tell you to go in. I'm not sure you can go in, but you'll see the synagogue on the outside as you walk around the ghetto. There are restaurants. Some of them are kosher in case you're concerned for that. It's just a really notable place. I want to mention one verse about something that the New Testament, the Apostle Paul said about Jewish people. He said that even though Jewish people are opposed to this faith, he says they remain beloved and chosen. That's exactly what he says. He uses those two words, beloved and chosen. And that the gifts and calling of God that God gave the Jewish people are irrevocable. So though often people try to make it seem that the Apostle Paul was somehow hostile to Jewish people, that's not the case. He called upon the early Roman church in Romans 11:28 and 29, who were developing that Gentile hostility, to say, no, Jewish people are God's beloved, chosen, and In fact, that's what he called the Christians of Rome to actually do. So just to clarify what the New Testament says, what does it say of the Jewish people? It says, even with opposition to the gospel, Jewish people remain chosen, the chosen people, beloved, have the gifts and calling of God that can never be taken away. What a different perspective than the early church fathers.